Hey, what's up you guys? You're watching TeamAPS on Alinthio's channel today. I'd like to thank him for letting me do this guest upload. He's also uploading a video on my channel, so stay tuned for that. And anyway, Alinthio likes to do discussions, and he does really good discussions. And I like to do discussions, so I figured it would be kind of a natural fit for a video swap. Today I'm going to be pondering what are second tier decks missing? What's keeping them from the upper echelon? So what do I mean by this? Well, in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, this isn't really anything new, but in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, there have always been tiers. There have always been top-tier decks that are simply a cut above the rest, and then there are lower-tier decks, and, you know, there's always just sort of been this divide, and maybe more recently it feels like it might be by design, but it's always been sort of a consistent thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, and it's kind of tough to put your finger on exactly why some decks are not top-tier decks. Especially because sometimes it feels like a deck has all that it needs, but it just doesn't. So let's talk about this a bit, and at the end of the video I'd like to hear you guys' opinions in the comments, where I will be responding. So, let's take recent history. I mean, this is kind of a problem that's happened for a long time, but we'll just take some recent examples. Necroz, Satellar Knight, Shaddoll, Burning Abyss, Cleaforts. And that might change kind of soon, but you get the idea. These are the current top tier decks. They just simply they place better, they're more popular, they just do better, they're stronger decks. But we've got a lot of decks that are kind of just beneath them and threats in their own right. We've got, you know, Infernoids, Ultra Athletes, Fluffles can do something, Yang Zing's a newer deck that can actually, you know, do a little bit of stuff. And then you've got, you know, sort of on the fringe decks, like Mermails and Fire Fists and Madolche and kind of some hat variants and older things like that. The question, you know, is what do these decks lack that things like Necroz have? So after thinking about it a bit, I kind of narrowed it down to a few factors. I think the first thing is consistency. Obviously, top tier decks are consistent. If they weren't consistent, they would not be able to do well at events. For, you know, a deck to do well at an event, you have to open well and, you know, be able to consistently get these plays off. And you have to be able to do that for, like, you know, 9, 10, 11 rounds at a YCS or a large regional. So Necroz have consistency. Necroz, a load of their cards are dedicated strictly to searching other cards. Brionet, Clozolas, Preparation of Rites, Manju, Sinju. They have, you know, all the answers in the book in terms of, like, being able to get the cards they want. Satellar Knights are very similar with Rhoda and Deneb, and you know, every top tier deck to some degree has that. For Shaddolls, it's actually like Sinister Shadow Games and Mathematician, and for Cleaforts, you know, Summer's Art and Scout. You get the idea, but you know, maybe it's not just consistency though, because there are lower tier decks that are fairly consistent, and actually very consistent even. A deck like Fire Fist is pretty consistent. I mean, it's got 3 copies of Tenki, and, you know, decks like that tend to be able to run something like Pot of Duality, so getting to the crucial cards early isn't really a problem. A newer example would even be Ultra Athletes, who have Signing Deal and Rhoda, both at 3, so, you know, why aren't they then, you know, a top tier deck? They're clearly very consistent. Six Samurai is another great example. They have like Rhoda and Smoke Signal. So it seems like consistency is part of it, but that doesn't seem like that's all of it. So what else is there? Well, I think of things like, we'll say, speed. Certain decks are a little bit faster than others, and speed's kind of a vague term, so to explain a bit, I just mean, you know, a fast deck can get, you know, hit the ground running, get its plays going quickly. Sometimes people ask me, like, why can't Gravekeepers be a top tier deck or, like, compete with the meta? And that's probably because they're really slow. Even though Gravekeepers are kind of consistent, you know, you have to sort of start off by, like, setting recruiters or spies and, you know, lots of back row. And you can't proactively play. You can't start your turn and go nuts like Shaddolls or Necroz maybe can. You kind of have to just slow roll it. You kind of got to set up, gather some resources, get some things into place. And there are, like, you know, B-list decks that can do that fairly well. Infernoids, given, you know, a good reasoning mill, can quickly go off, and decks like that. But then we kind of get back into that problem of consistency where Infernoids aren't terribly consistent. So although they're kind of fast and explosive, which I'll get to later, they aren't necessarily all that consistent. Another good example is Yang Zing, a deck that should be able to do well because it pluses a lot. It's another thing I'll talk about, but it's not also all that consistent. You can't really search individual Yang Zing monsters all that easily, and they're also fairly slow. You have to start by setting them most of the time and hoping for things like Yang Zing creation and just kind of taking a few turns to gather resources before you can make plays. So it seems like it is a mixture of consistency and speed. So the next thing is advantage, pluses. Top tier decks, typically one of the things that makes them extremely annoying is just the fact that they can plus so much, almost indiscriminately. It just feels like, as they do these combos, they just get, arbitrary pluses. Shaddoll's, as they, literally are L-fusing, the Shaddall monsters are plussing, Constructs plussing, and just, it feels like sometimes these decks can get so many +1s in their turn with like multiple cards in their hand, like Necroz can now, and Satellar Knights, and just in their field with more advantage than you have, more cards to play, more outs, and that's something that a lot of lower tier decks can't easily get. We'll take Ultra Athletes again. The deck can make some powerful plays, and it's fairly consistent. Maybe not necessarily that fast. See where this is going, but it also doesn't plus a whole lot. It can get some +1s when you have Stadium and midfielder, and it's nice, but it doesn't really plus as easily and as quickly as a lot of top tier decks do, and so that's sort of one of the big issues that deck can have. So let's maybe think about Infernoids. Infernoids also don't plus. Now granted, Infernoids is a deck that operates a little bit differently than most other decks because it's largely about the monsters being in the grave and just being able to revive themselves, but still, once you run out of cards in that deck, it can still be just as difficult to come back as it is for any other deck. And this happens with a lot of the lower tier decks today. So I feel like advantage is definitely one of the things. And then we have just power plays. Power plays, another kind of vague term, but you should get what I mean. Top tier decks tend to be able to put out plays, monsters, fields that apply pressure and are difficult for your opponent to handle. For a long time when the Necroz had the Genlock, they could Genlock you and use Trish and use Unicore and just these powerful monsters that locked you out of your plays while getting them advantage and just field presence. And the Necroz of Trishula is not a fun card to deal with. When it eats a card out of your hand, your field, and your grave, and it's 2,700, and they got it for free, and they're searching from Shrit or something, it's just, that's a power play. Shaddalls, when they go into Construct and they're sending 2 Shaddall monsters with L Fusion and, not Construct, Winda, but when they go into Construct and they're, sending a light and a Shaddall, and the Shaddall gets the effect, and the Construct sends, and that next Shaddall gets its effect, and, you kind of see where this is going, and then when they die, they get cards back, and so these are power plays, it's pressure. And a lot of lower tier decks, they don't necessarily have that. They might have something close to a power play. They might be able to put out big monsters, but oftentimes they don't. The monsters don't come as quickly, and the monsters don't have as much insurance. And so, insurance kind of leads to longevity, and that's another thing that it feels like these top tier decks have that low tier decks simply are lacking is top tier decks often are able to recycle their cards. So Satellar Knights, great example. But also Necroz now can literally recycle spells, but also, using Exa and Dance Princess, they can recycle pretty much anything else they want. Burning Abyss, Seer Dante loot, Shaddall, everything gets back a spell. So it's really kind of another factor that I feel like low tier decks are missing. Yang Zings, we'll just use them. They can sort of recycle. They have Yang Zing Path, but is that really as threatening as a Seer Dante loop or, calling back an Altair to a Vega to a Deneb to another search? Is it really as good? It's not, unfortunately. And so there are other things too. There's stuff like draw power, there's stuff like outs, but overall it feels like, consistency, speed, power plays, advantage, those kind of feel like the big factors, maybe longevity being the fifth, that just separate top tier decks from low tier decks, or not even necessarily low tier decks, but just those B-list decks that are good, but just not quite in that upper echelon. It's unfortunate, and I feel like, you know, recently it might sort of be a design idea that Konami has, where, you know, they just sort of purposefully make one deck or a group of decks better than other decks. And you can kind of tell, I mean, you know, usually archetypes like gimmick puppets or something, just, you know, they kind of weren't meant to be top tier from the get-go. And it's unfortunate, but it does feel like Konami does that. Melodious and like Performa Pals are just decks that are just here. Super Heavy Samurai. You just don't really hear about them because it feels like Konami kind of didn't intend for them to be top tier. That's unfortunate, but that seems like the truth. So I feel like I've rambled on long enough about this, but you guys get the idea. I want to know, what do you guys think makes a top tier deck a top tier deck? What are low tier decks missing? It feels to me like, you know, a lot of times they might have one or two of the crucial things, but then they're missing another one or two of the crucial things. So it's really a pretty crazy conundrum. But I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. I hope it kind of got you thinking about, you know, what makes a top tier deck tick. I want to talk about it in the comments. And also, thanks again to Will for letting me upload this video on his channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd appreciate it if you guys would go ahead and check out my channel, TeamAPS. I do similar discussions. I also do some deck profiles, some pack openings, and I do monthly giveaways. For July, I'm giving away 3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Chibi playmats. Alinthio actually opened these on his channel about a week ago. And also, I'm going to be giving away something new in August, which I'll be revealing very soon. So I hope you guys liked this. I hope you guys consider checking me out. And thanks again to Will. I'll catch you guys later. See ya.